Welcome to Inside Albania with me, Alice Taylor. This week has not been short of excitement with the announcement of the arrest of former Deputy Prime Minister Arben Ahmetaj and the subsequent chaos that ensued. In this week's show, I'll also tackle the topic of addiction and the stigma and challenges posed in Albanian society when combating it. Plus, on the similar note, plans to legalise medicinal cannabis. And I have an interview with Agricultural Minister Frida Kryca on hot issues such as migration, informality, digitalisation and EU accession. By far, the biggest story of this week was the issue of an arrest warrant for former Deputy Prime Minister Arben Ahmetaj on charges of false declarations, concealment of assets, corruption and money laundering. Now, this case relates to the government awarding of contracts for waste incinerators that were either not built, not finished, or did not function as agreed, costing the public purse millions of euros. The Special Court Against Corruption and Organised Crime, SPAC, after deciding there was enough evidence to arrest him, requested the Council of Mandates to lift his parliamentary immunity, paving the way for his arrest. On Wednesday, politicians decided to request his immunity be lifted in Parliament, the last step of the process. The problem is, however, that it seems Ahmetaj is no longer in the country. To follow the story as it develops, you can tune in to Euronews Albania. Now, I grew up in a farmhouse in rural England, miles away from anywhere else and surrounded by sheep and cows. So rural was my upbringing that I was nearly born in the back of a tractor, and I was often late to school due to the fact I was stuck behind herds of cows or sheep being moved from field to field. Therefore, in my blood is an interest in agriculture, and that's something that's continued since living in Albania. Currently, the agricultural sector in Albania is equivalent to almost 19% of the country's GDP, but it's fragmented, spread out in far-flung areas, and somewhat resistant to change. It's also been neglected in many ways since the fall of communism, which was precluded by a badly managed cooperative system that eventually resulted in widespread starvation and food shortages. As an EU membership candidate and aligning with the EU acquis looms large, I interviewed Agricultural Minister Frida Kryca about the challenges ahead and implementing EU standards and legislation on the ground. Frida, thank you very much for making the time to talk to me today. Before we get into the sort of technical questions, can you tell me a bit about yourself, how you ended up in the position as the Minister of Agriculture for Albania?
Good question. Thank you for your time, first of all, and thinking agriculture. I am the Minister of Agriculture since September 2021. It's been a hectic period. I guess my work prior to becoming the minister has been a highlight of the decision to become the Minister of Agriculture. I was the head of the paying agency for 4 years, a time where the agency completely revamped itself into an instrument of a paying agency according to the European Union standards. I was able to spend a lot of my time working in the field, understanding the needs of the farmers, understanding the rural space, understanding the needs, the providing for the farmers. So I guess this is the main reason as to why I was appointed, and it's been a roller coaster ride since, but a beautiful one with a lot of achievements, a lot of interesting phenomena that have happened and that we've been able to push forward.
Do you still get to get sort of hands-on ever with, people on the ground or anything like that?
I spend a lot of time actually in the field. It's my favorite time of still being the minister, because that's where you really get the energy of the rural space, of understanding whether the policies that you're implementing are having an effect or not.
The Albanian agricultural sector has a number of challenges facing it, and one of those is migration. I have spoken to farmers working in different sort of areas, and they've talked about sort of a lack of finding staff, and it can be due to internal migration, everybody wants to come to Tirana, or external migration as people leave the country. The other issue is, I think maybe there are challenges with young people as well, who maybe think, I don't want a career in, manual labour working in a field, or they don't see it as sort of a glamorous enough job for them. In your role as the minister, how do you try and combat this?
So migration or immigration is not just a phenomenon that is affecting agriculture, or Albania for that matter, is affecting the region, is affecting European countries as well. In a recent statistical report of Eurostat that I was reading, around 45% of the space in EU is actually considered rural territory, and only about 21% of the population lives there. So that speaks in itself about the loss of interest also of rural spaces in the European Union countries living there. You see countries such as Croatia suffering a lot within the European Union, or Bulgaria suffering a lot, where they're losing roughly between 3.5% each year. While other villages, rural areas such as the islands of Greece are having a spike. They're growing. Islands of Mallorca in Spain, they're having an increase. So you see, or rural areas in Germany, they're having an increase that are mainly linked to tourism. So this is a very interesting factor that we've noticed also in Albania. We have linked the possibility to maintain people in the rural areas and the young people, especially in the rural areas, with the diversification of the farms. So ever since 2018, we introduced a policy of agrotourism. At the time, we couldn't count possibly 10, 15 of them, and now only the ones that we have supported are more than 102 that have been financed through grants, either 50% or 60% in grants for their investment, to renew a particular old home, traditional stone house, or to completely make it new. So we have seen that this has been quite an attraction for the young people as well, to deal with different kinds of works that are happening in the farms.
Another issue that I've come across from speaking to those in the sector is informality. Starting with a lack of documents for land. You have people who've been working in areas, farming land for many, many years. They don't have the correct documents, which then leads to issues with maybe they haven't registered with the tax authorities, they don't have a NIPT, they're a bit cautious about digital services, they don't know how it works, etc. This makes it harder, I would imagine, to sort of consolidate and further develop the sector. How is it trying to reach those people and to encourage them to be more formal in the way that they work?
Land fragmentarization is a major challenge for the agriculture sector. This is for sure the truth behind every policy that we are trying to design. There have been quite some improvements in this regard. We now account roughly 94,000 farmers that have a NIP number. Now this is a farmer's NIP number. It's a different instrument. It's not the VAT number. But it's a NIP number where we fiscalize farmers and they are able to issue invoices. When I started working as previous director of the paying agency, we had roughly around 12,000 farmers identified with this number. It was very little. So the progress in 4 or 5 years has been tremendous in also educating the farmers that if you are a holder of such a NIP number, you are able to benefit from the policies of support, from the subsidy schemes, etc. We are a country that is more and more opening new markets and attempting to be present with its agricultural products in various European markets. We can't get there unless we have a very clear situation of who is who. For this reason, we created the Farmers Register for the first time last year. Another instrument that we just recently have presented is the Portals Farmer, Portali Farmerit. agroalbania.org.al, which is an instrument trying to create transparency over a sector that is touching most of the country's economic indicators, 20% of the GDP, 40% of employment. So it's a huge amount of the economic drive of this country.
What do you see as, I mean, you touched on it briefly there, obviously with the EU accession process, there are a lot of challenges that lie ahead in terms of aligning what farmers are doing and what needs to be done in order to enter the European market. What do you think are the biggest challenges that you are facing in terms of this, if you had to pick a couple?
European integration for agriculture goes into two parallel plans. First is definitely the regulatory. We have to abide by 3 chapters. And in these 3 chapters, we're working with the regulators, with all of the agencies that are working under the Ministry of Agriculture to align the acquis, so to align the legislation, as well as to align also our own practices towards supervisory control and all the mechanisms of conducting our operations, our daily activity. On the other hand is the whole sector that has to slowly but surely comply with these regulations. A lot of these approximations need to happen in the business community that conducts the activity of agriculture, exports, food preparation, the whole value chain. And there are a lot of investments required to happen there. On the other hand, there have been measures of processing for increasing our value added in processing of agricultural products, which is a major objective of the Ministry of Agriculture, so that we don't just export raw produce.
I see, just from living here for nearly 6 years, so much potential in terms of Albanian products which could be exported and marketed abroad, from olive oil to honey to herbs and things like that, things that can be created here and labelled up as an Albania product, branded in this way.
I had a collaboration with the Minister of Italy. In March, he was here together with a delegation of different businesses as well as associations. They're very well organized in cooperatives. So that's a model that we currently lack a bit in Albania. Farmers have a difficulty in cooperating with each other. That's why the measures that we're introducing for support have an underlying strategy to make them work with each other. So for instance, I'm just gonna mention this example because it's beautiful. We are providing them support for the 2nd year in a row for seedlings, where we ask them to provide a certified seedling, so they have to have a certificate of origin, formalization. I go back to your other question. And we also ask them for the certificate so that we know the guarantee behind this particular produce. As well as we ask them that if they have a smaller parcel or if they have a smaller greenhouse, for instance, less than 1 hectare, they can cooperate with other farmers and they can come under one application to receive the support. Obviously, the support goes in whichever's bank account, so individual bank account, but in order for them to benefit from this financial support, they have to come under one application. So that forces them to communicate with each other, to plan ahead, because they have to plant one particular culture, so watermelon X, YZ variation, in order to benefit from the support. And the support is good enough for them to be incentivized to be able to go through the hurdle of cooperating together. There's also another underlying interest in this from our point of view, where they become more powerful towards the points of collections or towards the exporters that are collecting their produce. If they cooperate together, they're able to negotiate better the prices. If they cooperate together, they're better able to negotiate prices also with the suppliers of their inputs. So we are very interested as Ministry of Agriculture, together with all our support staff, for them to connect better, to fight tradition of
Going it alone,
going on it alone and not being enough productive, not having enough competitive advantage.
It sounds like a carrot and stick, sort of you're dangling this carrot, they take a baby step, then that's the way to... Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also in the news, the Committee for Labour, Social Affairs and Health examined the draft law on legalising cannabis for medicinal use that was recently approved by the Council of Ministers. Health Minister Agurta Manastirliou said the draft creates a regulatory framework that covers the process of cultivation and processing of cannabis and its byproducts for medicinal and industrial purposes. The aim here is to increase revenue for the Albanian economy. Over the last decade, more than 35 countries have legalized cannabis for medicinal use, and around 22 in Europe have presented legislation for the same purposes. Under the proposed law, all entities would have to apply for a license, be verified, registered, and be subject to ongoing monitoring and penalties in case they violate anything. In addition, any licensee must have at least 3 years of experience in the medicinal cannabis sector, the employment of at least 10 staff, which must include 2 specialists. Now, the opposition has raised concerns that this goes against the penal code, where cannabis cultivation is illegal, and claims that the law is vague and poorly thought out. They also say there's no distinction between cultivation, production and use, which could risk a legal violation and go against EU directives. Now, Albania has a long history in cultivating cannabis, although not necessarily for legal use. And until 2014, the village of Lazorat in the south was known as the European capital of cannabis growing. Today, while the amount of cannabis produced illicitly in the country is believed to have been reduced, it is common knowledge that there are many areas in mountainous and rural areas where cultivation continues. At the end of June, the EU delegation in Tirana warned the Albanian government about pressing ahead with the law due to concerns over the capacity of law enforcement institutions. As a medicinal product, cannabis and its byproducts are used for chemotherapy side effects, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, chronic pain, depression, and pain caused by cancer. While the jury is out on its effectiveness, the government's proposal could be seen as an attempt to bring legality and regulation to a long-term illicit sector. My last topic for today is not something that's been in the news, it's not a headline, but rather it's something I think needs to be talked about more. Now, when I first came to Albania, I noted with a bit of humour that as I went to coffee shops, I wondered why people were drinking their morning coffee with a very small glass of water. At the time, I didn't realise it was rakia. I also observed that the drinking culture in Albania is very different to that in Europe and countries like the UK, where I'm used to a very heavy drinking culture, scenes of drunk people roaming the streets most nights of the week. In Albania, the statistics in terms of alcohol abuse appear to be much lower than the EU and regional average, but I've begun to suspect, after 6 years of being here, that this is due to underreporting rather than the reality of the situation. Alcohol addiction is something that's impacted people close to me on several occasions, and I've become aware of the stigma around addiction and the challenges and limitations that comes when trying to access help. With me today is toxicologist and addiction specialist, Dr. Sonila Pici. Good afternoon, Sonila. Thank you for taking the time out of your very important work to be here today.
Thank you, Alice, for the invitation and the possibility to share information about addiction and alcohol addiction especially.
It's a very important topic. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, I found it very difficult to find up-to-date statistics on the situation. For example, how many people have a problem with alcohol in Albania. And some statistics that I found showed, as I mentioned, that the number is very, very low. I'm not convinced on this. In your view as a professional, how widespread is the problem of alcohol abuse in our country?
I think the problem is underreported. Even in our study, even in the statistics of the government, it's unreported because in Albania, as you mentioned at the beginning, taking raki in the morning, it's a habit. It's a healthy, in brackets, habit because raki helps for the heart, raki helps for the health. So people don't know that raki can cause damages. And the first thing. The second thing is that they don't know how much it's normal. They think that 2 glasses or 3 glasses of raki it's normal for them. That's why they don't report consuming raki or other alcohol as a problem. For them, it's lifestyle. That's why it's not reported as a problem, as in fact it's reported. It's like an iceberg. The alcohol addiction or alcohol use disorders in Albania, it's like an iceberg. We have a low quantity of patients who come in our offices for consultation, but normally or often they are in severe stages of addiction, and a small number of people come for checkup, just for a routine checkup, because I deal with checkup as well. And during asking, I ask them, how many alcohol do you take per day? No, I don't take alcohol. I take only 2 or 3 glasses of wine every day, but it's not alcohol. I don't have a problem with alcohol. So during checkup, they reveal that in fact they have problems with alcohol.
I think as well, people, number one, you don't always know how strong the raki is.
Yes.
And
yes.
secondly, you might think, oh, I'm just having 1 or 2 in the morning, it's part of my daily routine, but you might not understand that your body has become dependent on it.
Yes.
And
yes.
you've become sort of psychologically dependent on it, and then it's very easy to sort of end up in a situation where it escalates and you end up drinking more and more. I think collecting data and having data, and also a definition of what alcohol abuse is, and making that clear to the public is very important in this.
The recent data say that alcohol use disorders is a chronic disease, chronic brain disease that affect not only the brain but even the family, the society, the psychosocial health of the individual. And it's treatable. That it's really important, because sometimes when the familiar with the patient come in my office, they are hopeless. They think that we are trying, but I don't think that my brother or my husband will get over this problem. But I always stress that this is a treatable disease, a chronic, like diabetes, like hypertension, but it's chronic.
So someone who suffers from a problem with alcohol, even though it can be treated, it remains.
Yes, because it's always I compare alcohol use disorders with diabetes, because we as society can admit more easily a patient with diabetes than a patient with alcohol use disorders. We don't stigmatize a patient with diabetes, but we stigmatize a patient with alcohol use disorders. He deserves that disease because he is using alcohol for his own pleasure. So pleasure is stigmatized in Albania. I think not only in our country, but even in other countries, in other cultures. But I see mostly in Albania. So we have to do a lot of work to change this mentality.
So if somebody has decided they want help and they want to stop drinking, what is the process to them getting help, and what is available sort of from the state in terms of rehabilitation and recovery and ongoing treatment as well? Because this is important.
Yes,
It's
yes.
not about just stopping them drinking and then setting them free. You have to follow up with care.
As I said, is a chronic condition, even the treatment should be chronic, so the follow-up should be chronic. The first step is the patient to come for visit, to visit a toxicologist, a psychiatrist, a family doctor, but in Albania the clinical toxicologist is the doctor who deals with addiction. And after the visit we appreciate all the data, physical and mental health, and then we decide if the patient should be followed at the home or in the hospital. In Albania, there are several services that offer inpatient treatment, possibility to recover this patient in hospital. And after leaving the hospital in a better condition, physical and mental condition, we continue the follow-up. What means follow-up? Means the patient should come every week or every 2 weeks or every month, according to physical or mental condition, to continue the treatment. And psychotherapy is included as well. So we cannot cure addiction without psychotherapy. And this is something new for most of clinical toxicologists. Till recently, we dealt only with physical part, but I'm more and more convinced that this not can be cured only with drugs, with pills, but with love. My motto is, as doctor, it's love is the best treatment. So this is what I say even to the familiars that sometimes feel hopeless, and to the society that try to stigmatize this patient. So let's love and give them help. It's really important.
And what challenges, what limitations are there in Albania at the moment? I mean, you mentioned that perhaps maybe not all toxicologists are aware of the importance of psychotherapy and treating the psychological side of things. But particularly in the state, you know, where we don't really know how many people are impacted and need help, what obstacles are in the way?
There are lack of medication, specific medication. Not all the medications are in Albania. The medication that helps for relapse prevention, alcohol relapse prevention therapy, because there are some drugs, 3-4 drugs, that can be chosen as treatment to help the patient not to go to relapse. But not all of them are in Albania. And sometimes we prescribe treatment that the patient should take outside the country, and not all the persons have this possibility. So lack of medication, it's one of the problem. The other problem, or most important, is outpatient rehab centers. We don't have state, so without cost, outpatient rehab centers. There are some centers that are with payment, and not all the patient can afford this, and many or some of them go outside Albania in some other countries, and it costs a lot. So this is one of the obstacles.
It's a big barrier for a country where people have 400 euros a month to live on. You know, I know the cost of one of the private clinics here, and it made me nearly fall over, and it's a real shame. But I guess you've mentioned a couple of times the impact that alcohol abuse has on the family. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize, how hard it is to live with someone who has a problem with alcohol. But to deal with them, to support them, to help them, etc. If there are people listening who are living with someone or love someone who has a problem like this, what advice would you give to them?
You said who love, and I like this expression. It's really hard to love somebody who has this problem. But when it's love, I think I suggest mostly in Albania came male for addiction, for searching help for addiction. But I say to the woman, let's give a last chance, because sometimes in my office come couples who rehabilitation is the last possibility for their family. And I find myself begging to the woman, please, let's try together, me, you, and the other familiars, another chance for your family. If you love him, let's give another chance, because the individual who has this addiction, it's not aware always of the consequences. So he's not doing all the things for purpose. He doesn't know what he's doing, what he's causing to his family, to his friends. And I see many families that has overcome this problem, and they say to me, we are relieved, we have another life now. And when I see these things, I become more optimistic, and I continue to beg women to help, to continue to help their husband. This is not maybe so professional, but as a doctor, sometimes I cannot differ being a doctor from being a human being. So I sometimes I find myself being both of them.
I think that's
pushing the limits.
an
So.
important quality to have. I think in my experience, the difference between someone it's not just about being drunk, it's chronic alcohol abuse, it changes the personality completely.
Yes.
And there's a night and day difference between
Yes.
them. And I think it's important that people understand that.
Yes.
So Nila, thank you very much for your time
Thank you.
for your very honest words.
Thank you for this opportunity to share information.
That's all for this week. You can tune in to Inside Albania every Saturday on Euronews Albania, on our YouTube channel, and across all major podcasting platforms. Miro Pafsha.